The house was unbearably silent. After years of hearing the comforting hum of his voice, his laughter echoing down the hall, and the familiar rhythm of his footsteps, the quiet felt oppressive. A month ago, my husband had passed away suddenly, leaving me in a haze of grief. Every corner of our home whispered reminders of him. His favorite mug on the counter, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the bedroom. That's when my son, Daniel, insisted on staying with me. "Just for a while, Mom," he'd said gently, brushing my hair out of my face as I sat numb on the couch. "You shouldn't be alone." At first I resisted. He had his own life to live, a bustling career in the city, friends and obligations. But Daniel wouldn't take no for an answer, and when he arrived with his overnight bag and that earnest smile, a part of me, deeply grateful, allowed myself to exhale. Daniel brought with him a warmth that slowly began to fill the void in the house. Mornings started with his voice as he brewed coffee, filling the air with gentle banter. Evenings became a routine of shared meals, old movies, and moments of unexpected laughter. He had a way of lightening the weight on my chest, of reminding me there was still life to be lived. One evening after dinner, he found me standing by the window, lost in thought. The streetlights outside cast long shadows across the room, their soft glow competing with the dim light of the lamp beside me. "Mom," he said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You've been staring out there for a while. What's on your mind?" I turned to face him, my eyes brimming with tears I couldn't quite contain. "It's just, everything feels so different now. Like I'm stuck in a house that doesn't belong to me anymore." Daniel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he pulled me into a hug, his arms strong and steady. "It's still your home, Mom. And I'm here now. We'll get through this together." His words were more comforting than I'd expected, and I leaned into him, letting myself take solace in his presence. The days were growing easier to bear with Daniel around. He had an effortless way of keeping me occupied, whether it was dragging me out for walks in the park or convincing me to watch those action movies he loved, the ones I would have dismissed as too loud and ridiculous. It wasn't much, but it was enough to distract me from the gaping hole in my chest. One morning, as I pored over a photo album at the dining table, Daniel approached with a bright, almost conspiratorial smile. He slid into the seat across from me, his fingers idly drumming against the wood. "Mom," he began, his tone playful, "when was the last time you bought yourself something nice?" I glanced up from the photo of my wedding day, my brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "Clothes," he said simply, his grin widening. "I don't think I've seen you in anything new since I was in high school." I couldn't help but chuckle. "Well, I'm not exactly dressing for a runway, Daniel. What's the point?" "The point," he said, leaning forward with mock seriousness, "is that you deserve to feel good. And I think it's about time we do something fun for a change." I opened my mouth to argue, but he raised a hand to stop me. "No excuses. We're going shopping. And tonight I'm taking you out to dinner. It's non-negotiable." His enthusiasm was infectious, and though I hesitated at first, I finally relented. "Fine," I said, shaking my head with a small smile. "But don't think you're talking me into anything extravagant." He winked. "We'll see about that." By late afternoon, we were wandering through the bustling aisles of a department store. Daniel had taken charge, plucking blouses, dresses, and even a few pairs of heels from the racks with the confidence of a seasoned shopper. I followed along, bemused by his energy. "This," he said, holding up a sleek navy dress, "is absolutely you. Try it on." I raised an eyebrow. "You think so?" "Trust me," he replied, shoving it into my hands and steering me toward the fitting rooms. Inside, I slipped into the dress, its soft fabric hugging me in all the right places. I hadn't worn anything this elegant in years, and for a moment, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. When I stepped out to show Daniel, his face lit up. "Wow," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "You look stunning, Mom." I felt a blush creep up my cheeks. "It's just a dress." "It's not just a dress. You looking amazing." I'm not taking no for an answer. This is coming home with us. Despite my protests, Daniel insisted on buying the dress, along with a few other items he claimed were essential. By the time we left the store, I was carrying more bags than I thought I'd ever own, and Daniel was wearing a triumphant grin. That evening, we went to a small Italian restaurant nestled in the heart of the city. It was cozy, with dim lighting and soft music playing in the background. Daniel had even swapped his usual jeans and t-shirt for a button-down and slacks, which made me smile. "You clean up well," I teased as we sat down at our table. "Look who's talking," he shot back, gesturing to my new dress. "I think half the people in this place are staring at you." "Stop it," I said, laughing, but I couldn't deny the warmth his words brought. It had been so long since I felt confident, let alone beautiful. We ordered pasta and wine, the conversation flowing as easily as it had in his childhood. We talked about everything. His work, my memories of his father, even silly anecdotes from his school days. For the first time in weeks I felt light, almost carefree. At one point, Daniel leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine thoughtfully. "You know," he said, his voice quieter now, "Dad would be really proud of you." I blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift in tone. "Why do you say that?" "Because you're strong," he replied, meeting my gaze. "Even after everything, you're still here, still trying. And I know it hasn't been easy." A lump formed in my throat, and I reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "I don't feel strong most days," I admitted. "But having you here, it helps." His hand tightened around mine, a silent reassurance that he understood. As we left the restaurant that night, the city streets glittering under the soft glow of streetlights, I felt a strange sense of peace. Daniel looped his arm through mine as we walked back to the car, his presence a steady anchor. "Today was nice," I said, glancing up at him. "Thank you." "It was just the beginning," he replied with a wink. "I've got plenty more planned for you, Mom." I laughed, the sound surprising even me with its ease. For the first time in a long while, I felt like life might just have a little brightness left to offer. And as we drove home, the new dress folded carefully in the back seat, I couldn't help but feel grateful. For my son, for his insistence on pulling me out of my grief, and for the small, precious moments that reminded me how to live again. When we got home, the warmth of the house wrapped around us, a stark contrast to the crisp night air. I slipped off my heels with a sigh of relief and carried the shopping bags to the living room. Daniel followed behind, a mischievous grin playing on his lips. "All right, Mom," he said, setting down his keys. "Tonight isn't over yet." I raised an eyebrow, amused by his energy. "And what exactly do you have in mind?" He leaned casually against the kitchen counter, his expression thoughtful. "How about this? I'll make some mulled wine while you take a hot bath. You deserve to relax after such a big day." The suggestion caught me off guard. It wasn't often that someone took care of me so deliberately. For years I'd been the one doting on others. My husband, Daniel, even neighbors in need. But now, with Daniel stepping into the role of caretaker, I felt both touched and a little hesitant. "You don't have to do all that, sweetheart," I said softly, though the idea was undeniably tempting. He waved off my protest. "I want to. Go on, get upstairs. I'll bring the wine up when it's ready." I carried myself upstairs, my legs still a little sore from all the walking we'd done earlier. In the bathroom, I turned the taps and watched as steam began to curl up from the filling tub, carrying with it a soothing promise of warmth. I poured in some lavender-scented bath oil, something I hadn't used in years, and stripped down, letting the day's tension fall away with my clothes. As I sank into the bath, the hot water cradling me like a cocoon, I closed my eyes and exhaled deeply. The lavender mingled with the rising steam, wrapping me in its calming embrace. For the first time in what felt like forever, I let my mind drift without being weighed down by grief. A gentle knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. "Mom." "It's me," Daniel called softly from the other side. "Can I come in?" I pulled a towel over myself and called back, "Come in." The door creaked open, and Daniel stepped in, holding 2 steaming mugs. The scent of mulled wine, cinnamon, cloves, and oranges, filled the room, and I couldn't help but smile. He set one mug on the edge of the tub within my reach and held the other in his hands. "You didn't have to go to so much trouble," I said, taking the warm mug in my hands. The heat seeped into my palms, soothing in a way I hadn't realized I needed. "Making mulled wine isn't exactly rocket science," he replied with a chuckle. "I wanted to do something nice for you." We sat in companionable silence for a moment, the only sound the faint crackle of the candle I'd lit on the counter. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, sipping his wine, and for a moment, I saw not just my son but the man he had become, thoughtful, kind, and far more mature than I sometimes gave him credit for. "You're really something, you know that?" said my voice soft. He smiled at me over the rim of his mug. "Just looking after my favorite lady." I rolled my eyes but couldn't suppress a laugh. "You're impossible." His grin widened. "And you love me for it." After finishing my bath and slipping into a plush robe, I joined Daniel downstairs. He had tidied up the kitchen and lit a couple of candles on the coffee table, their flickering light giving the room a cozy glow. A soft instrumental playlist was playing in the background, and I marveled at how much effort he'd put into making the evening special. "This feels like one of those self-care retreats I always see in magazines," I teased as I sank into the couch. "Well, we'll save the mud masks and cucumber slices for next time," he quipped, settling into the armchair across from me. We sat there for hours, sipping the mulled wine and talking about anything and everything. Daniel shared stories from work, anecdotes about his college days, and even a few embarrassing tales from his childhood, which had me laughing so hard I had tears in my eyes. "Do you remember that time Dad tried to teach me how to fish?" Daniel asked, his voice warm with nostalgia. I nodded, a smile tugging at my lips. "How could I forget? You cast your line straight into a tree, and your father spent the next half hour untangling it while you sulked." He groaned, though his grin betrayed him. In my defense, I was 7. Coordination wasn't exactly my strong suit. "Still isn't," I teased, dodging the pillow he tossed my way. As the night wore on, the wine loosened our tongues and softened the edges of the day. I realized just how much I'd missed this connection, this ease of being with someone who knew me so completely. Daniel had always been my pride and joy, but in the last month, he had become something more. A rock, steady and unyielding in the face of my grief. When the clock chimed midnight, I stretched and stifled a yawn. I should get to bed. Daniel stood and helped me to my feet, his hand warm and steady on mine. "Good night, Mom," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. "And remember, today was just the beginning." As I climbed the stairs and crawled into bed, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude that ran deeper than words. For the first time since my husband's passing, I felt not just the ache of his absence but the comfort of knowing that I wasn't alone. Daniel's care, his thoughtfulness. It was a reminder that love could take on many forms and that healing, while slow, was possible. After a long and indulgent evening, I lay in bed, the warmth of the mulled wine still lingering in my chest. The house was quiet, save for the faint creaks of its old beams settling in the night. I was just on the edge of sleep when a gentle knock on my door stirred me awake. "Mom." "It's me," Daniel's voice called softly. I blinked, adjusting to the dim light of my room. "Come in," I replied, sitting up against the headboard and pulling the blanket around me. The door opened, and Daniel stepped inside, his expression warm and relaxed. He held a small bottle of lavender-scented oil in his hand, which caught the faint glow of my bedside lamp. "I noticed you've been rubbing your shoulders all day," he said, gesturing to the oil. "I thought a massage might help." For a moment I hesitated. It wasn't something we'd ever done before. It felt like a gesture that came with a different kind of intimacy. But then I remembered how much he'd done to care for me over the past month, how natural it had felt to lean on him during this time. I smiled, setting aside my reservations. "That's thoughtful of you, Daniel," I said. "Thank you." He pulled a chair over from the corner of the room and set it beside the bed. "Turn around and sit here," he instructed gently, his voice calm and reassuring. I moved to the chair, my back to him, and pulled my robe a little lower to expose my neck and shoulders. The warmth of his hands was immediate as he rested them lightly on my shoulders. "Let me know if this is too much pressure," he said, his voice low as he poured a small amount of oil into his palms and rubbed them together. The first touch was careful, his hands moving with a deliberate gentleness that quickly dissolved the tension in my upper back. I sighed deeply, leaning into the sensation. It had been years since I'd let myself enjoy something so simple and soothing. "Do you remember when Dad used to do this for me after a long day?" I murmured, my eyes drifting closed. "He wasn't great at it, but he tried." Daniel chuckled softly. "Do. I remember walking in once and thinking he was torturing you because you were groaning so loudly." I laughed, the sound light and genuine. It was his way of showing he cared, I suppose. He always said he wanted to take care of me, even if he didn't always know how. "Well," Daniel said, his thumbs working a particularly stubborn knot between my shoulder blades, "he taught me well. Taking care of you is the least I can do." There was something in his tone, earnest and heartfelt, that made my chest tighten. I turned my head slightly to glance at him, his face focused and serene in the soft light. "You've been such a blessing, Daniel," I said quietly. "I don't know how I would have managed these past few weeks without you." His hands stilled for a moment, resting gently on my shoulders. "I'd do anything for you, Mom. You know that, right?" I nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the depth of his care. "I do." As he resumed the massage, I felt my body sink further into relaxation. His hands moved skillfully, kneading away the tension that had built up over weeks of grief and stress. It was more than just a physical release, it felt like he was easing some of the emotional weight I carried as well. "This oil smells amazing," I said after a while, breaking the comfortable silence. "Lavender," he replied. "I read somewhere that it's good for stress. Figured it might help you sleep better." I smiled to myself, struck once again by his thoughtfulness. "You've always been so attentive," I said. "Even as a little boy, you were always checking to make sure I was okay." He laughed softly. "I guess some habits stick." When he finally finished, my shoulders felt loose and light, and a pleasant warmth radiated through my back. I turned to face him, my expression one of genuine gratitude. "That was wonderful, Daniel," I said. "Thank you." He smiled, a touch of pride lighting up his face. "I'm glad you liked it." Standing, he placed the oil back on the nightstand and stretched his arms over his head. "You should get some sleep," he said, his tone gentle. "It's been a long day." I nodded, suddenly feeling the full weight of exhaustion settling over me. "Good night, sweetheart." "Good night, Mom," he replied, leaning down to press a soft kiss to my forehead. Then he turned and left the room, closing the door quietly behind him. As I lay back in bed, the house returning to its comforting silence, I found myself reflecting on the evening. Daniel's presence had been a balm for my soul, his kindness and care slowly helping me find my footing again. It was a strange but welcome realization, that even in the darkest moments, love had a way of shining through, reminding me that I wasn't alone. Sleep came easily that night, carrying with it a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I woke to the soft light of morning filtering through the curtains, painting the walls of my bedroom with a warm, golden hue. The air was still, the kind of peaceful stillness that followed a good night's sleep. For the first time in weeks, I felt rested, the ache in my shoulders from the previous day's shopping and emotions now a distant memory. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my haze. "Mom." Daniel's voice, warm and familiar, came from the hallway. "You awake?" "Come in," I called, pulling the blanket up around me as the door creaked open. Daniel stepped in, a mug of coffee in each hand and a sleepy smile on his face. He wore a pair of sweats and a plain t-shirt, his hair slightly tousled from sleep. The sight of him, so at ease and domestic, tugged at my heart. "Thought you could use this," he said, handing me one of the mugs. The rich aroma of coffee wafted up, instantly making me feel more awake. "You're spoiling me," I teased, taking the mug and cradling it in my hands. The warmth seeped into my fingers, grounding me. Someone has to, he shot back, settling onto the edge of the bed with his own coffee. Besides, you deserve it. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping our drinks. The morning felt unhurried, as though the world outside the house didn't exist. You know, I began, breaking the quiet. I could get used to this. Coffee in bed, a full day of pampering. It's not bad. Daniel laughed softly, his eyes sparkling with amusement. Well, don't get too used to it. I'm not sure I can keep up this level of service forever. Pity, I replied with a mock sigh, though the warmth in my chest was real. You've been so good to me, Daniel. I don't know how I'll manage when you go back to your life. His expression softened, and he reached out to place a hand over mine, where it rested on the blanket. I'm not going anywhere, Mom. Not until you're ready. We're a team, remember? His words, so genuine and full of love, made my throat tighten. I squeezed his hand lightly, gratitude and something deeper stirring in my chest. I don't say it enough, but thank you, I said. For everything. He gave me a small smile and leaned in, brushing a soft kiss against my cheek. You don't have to thank me, he murmured. It's just us now. We take care of each other. The gesture was simple, but it left me momentarily breathless. There was an intimacy in it that hadn't been there before, a quiet reassurance that deepened the connection between us. I turned my head slightly, catching his gaze. His eyes held a warmth that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't since his father's passing. For a moment, the world seemed to pause, the air between us heavy with unspoken emotions. Daniel, I began, but the words caught in my throat. I wasn't even sure what I was trying to say. He seemed to understand, his smile growing as he pulled back slightly. Finish your coffee, he said, his tone lighter now. You've got a big day ahead. I laughed, grateful for the break in tension. Big day, huh? What have you got planned for me this time? You'll see, he teased, standing and stretching. I'll let you get ready. Breakfast in 20 minutes. Make it 30, I replied with a grin, watching as he left the room. The rest of the morning unfolded with the same sense of easy warmth. Daniel had made pancakes, which we ate at the kitchen table while chatting about everything and nothing. He kept the mood light, sharing stories from his childhood that had me laughing so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. But beneath the laughter and the familiarity, there was a shift, subtle but undeniable. The way his hand lingered on mine when he passed the syrup, the warmth in his gaze when he caught me smiling, the soft brush of his shoulder against mine as we cleared the table. Each moment felt charged, though neither of us acknowledged it. As I washed the last of the dishes, I caught him watching me from across the room. His arms crossed and an unreadable expression on his face. What? I asked, tilting my head in curiosity. Nothing, he replied quickly, though the faint blush on his cheeks betrayed him. Just. You look happy. I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. That's because I am. And I realized in that moment that I truly was. For the first time in weeks, the heaviness of grief had lifted, replaced by a quiet contentment I hadn't thought possible. And it was all because of him. Come on, he said suddenly, holding out a hand. Let's go for a walk. It's too nice a day to stay inside. I dried my hands and took his, letting him lead me out into the sunshine. The warmth of his touch lingered long after, a silent promise that whatever lay ahead, we would face it together.